and welcome to the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin.
And rephrasing the words of a prominent diplomat, you know, diplomats have a tongue to avoid speaking the truth. Well, we're not like that. We actually gather here to speak our minds, and we need some harsh and truthful assessments, not in order to debate with one another and point fingers, but in order to figure out what's been going on in the world and why the world has become ever less predictable and more prone to risks, and why the risks are increasing everywhere. The issues of this year's discussion have already been enumerated, and the overall theme of this year's meeting of the club is the new game rules, or a game without rules. This basically outlines a choice that all of us will have to do. The point that today's world is rapidly changing is nothing new. We all know it, and of course this has been already voiced so many times. It is difficult not to see fundamental transformations in global politics, the global economy, social life, technology, and so on. But let's not forget analyzing the present state of affairs. Let's not forget the lessons of history. You know, changing a world order. And this is exactly what we're witnessing today. Usually, such changes would be accompanied, if not by a global war or conflicts, confrontation, then at least by a series of local conflicts. Secondly, global politics are primarily about economic leadership, issues of war and peace, and humanitarian issues, including human rights. There have been a lot of contradictions building up in the world, and we need to ask one another in good conscience whether we have a good insurance against confrontation. Unfortunately, there are no guarantees that the existing system of global and regional security is capable of securing us against turbulations. That system has been seriously undermined and deformed. International, regional institutions for political, economic and cultural interaction are also experiencing serious crisis these days. Indeed, a lot of the institutions for preserving peace have been created a long time ago, following the Second World War, and the system used to rely not only on the balance of powers, not only on the balance of force, and not only on the rights of the winner, but also on the fact that the founding fathers of that security system used to respect one another, and they did not try to extort something from one another by force. They were forced to seek compromise with one another. That system, despite all of its flaws, enabled the world to stay within some limits and tried to somehow mitigate the natural competition of nations, of states. The system of checks and balances that took decades to create and develop, it was something that we should not have destroyed without proposing something to replace it. Because if we had disposed of those institutions, then we would have been left with nothing to deal with the modern-day global challenges. Unfortunately, the United States, who consider themselves the winners of the Cold War, believe that there is no need in those checks and balances. And instead of trying to secure stability in the world, they actually took measures that led to a strong disbalance. The Cold War is over, but it was not over with the signing of peace. It did not end with clear-cut arrangements about some rules and standards to be observed. We have an impression that the so-called winners of the Cold War decided to get the most out of the situation, exploit it as much as possible, and refashion the whole world in accordance with their own interests and ideas. If the entire system of international law and the checks and balances were an obstacle to their intentions. They were immediately proclaimed to be outdated, obsolete, and subject to destruction. This is how a nouveau riche behaves, someone who unexpectedly gets a fortune. They start squandering their gains, believing that this will last forever. And I believe the West has made a lot of blunders because of that. We've entered into a period of mistrust in international politics, and international law used to had to be tramped by issues of political rationale and pragmatism. Total control of international media enabled our counterparts to pass something white for something black and to spin their stories any way they wanted.
And Russia's president has delivered one of his strongest foreign policy statements ever, hitting out at America for trying to reshape the world to its own benefit. Vladimir Putin was addressing an informal group of scholars at the annual Vow Die discussion club, the event held in Sochi this year, and that's where RT's Yegor Piskunov now reports from.
Global security is in crisis. That's the message from President Putin, who accused the U.S. of dragging the world into chaos, ignoring rules and punishing those who don't share its interests.
There are many tried and tested ways of influencing insubordinates. There are military actions, economic ones, and propaganda pressure. There's interference into domestic affairs and appeals to a supra-legal legitimacy when it's needed to justify legal intervention in different conflicts or toppling inconvenient regimes. Recently, we have increasing evidence that outright blackmail has been used with regard to a number of leaders.
The president also noted how the mistakes of the past still find their way into the present. Western-backed jihadists fighting against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan later turned into Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And now rebels in Syria have turned into Islamic State, which is destroying the Middle East.
President Obama labeled the Islamic State as one of the main global threats. But who helped to arm those fighting against Assad in Syria? Who created a political and informational climate that fits their interests? Who promoted weapon transfers? I think this policy is absolutely irrational, unprofessional and groundless.
Crimea and the double standards surrounding it were also talked about, and he made clear that Russia would protect its interests with the help of an old saying.
In 1954, Khrushchev, who for some reason liked to hit his shoe on the desk at the United Nations, decided to delegate Crimea to Ukraine. This was a blatant violation of the legislation of that time.
Finally, talking about sanctions, Putin said they are hurting all sides, but stressed they're not going to force Russia to isolate itself from the world. President Putin is no stranger to tough words, but some of the statements he made here at the forum were among the strongest yet. A sign Moscow is not indifferent to what's happening in the world and can't ignore rules constantly being broken, since stable and reliable global security is something everyone should be more than interested in. Yegor Piskunov, RT, reporting from Sochi.
Vladimir Putin also told the International Discussion Club that sanctions are actually encouraging countries to seek financial and economic sovereignty. RT International caught up with some former senior government officials who joined the conference this year to get their opinions on the economic warfare between Moscow and Western countries.
Historically, as far as I know, sanctions, except for the case of South Africa, and South Africa was a very particular case, normally did not succeed in changing the positions of a country. And in the case of Russia, there is also, this is a country that has a maneuver space. That's not, it has a space for maneuvering. It's not going to be easy, but it has Eurasia, it has China, it can move around.
Well, I believe that we are all paying the price for the sanctions. Of course, Russia, because of more economic and financial difficulties, but also the West. This is true in Europe, where we see that the growth and the difficulty in getting the recovery is very hard. In all of this crisis, we need Russia. And at the same time, Russia needs the world.
We are moving now in a new era. There is no hegemon anymore, no one unipolar world, not one country could dictating everything. We are going into a multipolar world, and Russia, of course, plays an important part in it. Russia has enormous resources, is our neighbor. And, you know, you cannot change your family, your territory, or your neighborhood.
Now, Putin's strong comments saw his speech branded in the international media as his most anti-American diatribe ever. Some read his message as being, quote, "Don't mess with Mother Russia."
US policies and Western policies in general are not the result of a genuine perception of a Russian threat. Rather, they are guided by a long-term geopolitical game which hasn't changed since the Cold War.
It's a very, very strong speech. And it reveals that Putin is really frustrated in his relations with the United States and with the West as a whole. And perhaps they can directly take that point and say, right, he's so frustrated, perhaps this is the time to enter in some kind of dialogue.
Now, the UN Security Council held a special meeting over the use of cluster bombs by the Ukrainian military in populated areas. A top UN official expressing deep concern over the issue.
Due to wide impact radius, cluster munitions regularly have an immediate indiscriminate impact when used in areas with a civilian presence. Their use in such situations constitutes a violation of international humanitarian law and may amount to a war crime.
Now, the meeting was called after Human Rights Watch accused Kiev of using the weapons which are banned in more than 100 countries. Each rocket containing dozens of smaller bombs which explode when they hit the ground across the area the size of several football fields, though with very little accuracy.
We are in the middle of a sunflower field about 16 to 18 kilometers south of Donetsk. This confirms to us that we're in the flight path in the areas that Ukrainian military forces are firing surface-to-surface rockets into Donetsk, and also confirms to us that they're using cluster munitions among these rockets.
Poland's parliamentary speaker has said his comments to a US magazine that Russian President Vladimir Putin wanted to divide Ukraine with Warsaw in 2008 had been misinterpreted. Radoslaw Sikorski clarified his remarks via Twitter after Politico quoted the former foreign minister as saying Putin thought Ukraine was an artificial country and that Lviv should actually be a Polish city. The revelations could stoke tensions between Moscow and Warsaw even further in light of the Kremlin's aggression against Ukraine and the arrest of 2 suspected Russian spies in Poland. The magazine quoted Sikorski as saying that then Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk didn't reply to Putin's suggestion because he knew he was being recorded. Poland never expressed any interest in joining the Russian operation, the article goes on to claim. Neither Poland's foreign ministry nor Russian officials have been available to comment. Sikorski's account is not the first suggestion that Russia was seeking Poland's support in dividing Ukraine. Following Russia's invasion and annexation of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, Russian politician Vladimir Zhirinovsky sent a letter to the governments of Poland, Romania and Hungary proposing a joint division of Ukraine. Putin has often claimed Ukraine's insurgent-occupied Donetsk and Luhansk regions are now part of Novorossiya, or New Russia, a term used during the Russian Empire for now Ukraine's land north of the Black Sea.